a lot of ground to cover, so bear with us. It's going to be a high-level overview, but hopefully it will keep traders up to date with what's happening. So this is just before I officially kick off, this webinar will be recorded, and the slides, the recording will be circulated to delegates afterwards. So please connect with your local chamber that you register with next week for those. So thank you again for joining us. Today, I'm gonna start introducing what the Chambers Trade Academy is. I'm gonna go over the UK key customs and regulatory changes that are coming up. And then I'm gonna ask a couple of our experts covering the changes in the EU side, such as the CBAM and VAT. There will be some chance for Q&A at the end of the session, so please make sure that you use your Q&A box to put any questions that you have there, and we'll pick them up at the end. And then I'll just cover some of the upcoming sessions in case you also want to join those. So what are the Chambers Trade Academy? This is an initiative by selected number of chambers of commerce across the UK, where we're providing short visual sessions, providing informative and educational content in relation to export, import, customs, tips to go global, and as today, giving you an overview of latest regulations that may affect your business. Combined, we represent over 15,000 businesses of all sizes and sectors. Across the board, the network, all the chambers involved, offer a wide range of international trade support to traders of all sizes and sectors. That ranges from international trade events, showcasing some business opportunities across the globe, readiness assessment, training courses, sorry, the slide, I think, went off. So, Francesco, can you help me? So we cover a wide range of services, as in the slide that will hopefully show up shortly.
Can you shut them now? Can you shut them now?
Thank
Can you
you.
try again?
Thank you. Sorry about that. We'll continue. Market entry services, commercial debt recovery, customs consultancy, ranging from tariffs, Incoterms, VAT, export control and licensing, etc. Commercial debt recovery, foreign exchange services, letters of credit, certification, legalization, and apostille services. So we help exporters with their certificates of origin, import certificates, ER1s, ATA carnets for temporary export, and so forth. We are also customs brokers, so we help UK registered companies with their export and import customs clearance. And we are just here to help you navigate through the complexities of trading with the world. Now without further ado, I'll start with the overview of the customs changes in the UK. But before, if I can ask Francesco to launch a poll, and if you can kind of provide us a feedback of how clear are you at this point in time about the upcoming changes that are being introduced in the BTOM and the Windsor Framework, will be fantastic. It will help us with Francesco, can you launch it, please? It will help us to understand how clear is your business in terms of these changes. It will take you it's only three questions there, so not that one. The one for the BTOM and Windsor, please. Never mind, I don't think it worked this time, but I'm gonna go continue. Okay, there it is. So if you can vote very quickly, it will be great. Well, this is kind of expected. Thank you so much for your feedback. It is great to see your feedback on this in terms of how well. Fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to close the poll because we are on a time schedule here, but thank you so much for your feedback. I'm going to allow for a few more seconds so we reach at least 40. Thank you so much for this. I'm going to close it now. So to continue, some of the clear changes that are happening. So the BTOM, the latest version was launched in August, and this is introducing the remaining import controls for goods coming into the UK from the EU, and that had not been introduced and have to do with mostly agri-food related businesses. So the new model is based on goods categorization and adopting a highly digitized kind of approach. The goods categorization will tell you what kind of documentation, identity, and physical checks they will be subject to from which agencies. The first in line in terms of the changes coming up is on the 31st of January, so basically next week, with the introduction of health certificates for imports of medium risk animal products, plant products, and high risk of food and feed for non-animal origin from the EU. Also on the 30th of March, and this was moved from last year, the deadline was for last year to do the migration to CDS for exports, has been moved for the 30th of March, and we do not expect that this will be further delayed. So if you have not made the transition, we urge you to talk to your local chamber if they are your customs broker or your local broker to ensure that you're done it before this deadline. On the 30th of April, we'll see the introduction of documentation and risk-based identity and physical checks on medium risk products, plant products, and high risk food and feed of non-animal origin from the EU. The good news is, and all these new changes, is that there will be also a simplification for SPS import processes from non-EU countries. So anything coming from new EU countries will be benefit from this new risk category model. So meaning that maybe for low risk goods coming from non-EU, there will be no need any longer for a health certificate, for instance. On the 30th of April, we are also going to see the removal of pre-notification requirements for low-risk plants and products coming from the EU, Liechtenstein, and Switzerland, and the inspections of high-risk plants and plant products will be moved from destination to the border control post. On the 31st of October, another big change is coming up, the introduction of safety and security declarations for imports coming into the UK from EU. Please note that this has already been placed from new non-EU countries since 2011. And the other big change is with the reduction of data sets required for the imports and the introduction of the UK single trade window. And this is an important one because the single trade window will act as a single gateway between business and UK border processes. And it will be also used by carriers, hauliers, customs brokers, intermediaries, and so forth. So what it says is that you will only need to submit the information once and in one place, and it will also allow you to communicate with different agencies from one single platform. So that's a very important change. So I mentioned that this new model is based on the categorization of the goods. So as you can see in the slide, low risk, medium risk, and high risk, and it will tell you what is the indicative checks that they will be subject to, depending on that. So low risk is basically should be just gone through without minimal checks unless they are suspected to be under a criminal activity or smuggling. Then they might be subject to a physical and identity check. medium and high risk, as you can see in the slide, the likelihood is 100% for the documentation checks, for high risk, 100% for ID and physical checks. There is a link underneath where you can check in more detail the different categories for animal and animal product imports. So some of the preparations that we are asking or encouraging traders to consider. So if you are within the agri-food business, make sure that you understand in which risk category your product falls under. Also, make sure that you are liaising with your EU counterparts so they understand where they need to obtain the necessary certificates. And you also liaise with the respective agencies here, depending on what products are you importing. There also submit correctly a pre-notification on IPAFs and make sure that you have the right document codes on the customs declarations and present the relevant shipment for inspections with PCB. So make sure that you are understanding which UK agency you also need to liaise with for any additional importing requirements. So now the Windsor Agreement, another big step up from the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is looking to ease up the trade tensions that were generated under the Northern Ireland Protocol between GB and Northern Ireland. The Windsor Agreement basically is introducing the concepts of the green and red lanes, which aim to minimize the green lane specifically aims to minimize the customs, the burdensome brought by the existing arrangement. So this is a recap of what already happened in 2023. In May 23, we saw the temporary VAT zero already applicable in GB to be extended in Northern Ireland for the domestic installation of solar panels, insulations, heat pumps, and other energy savings material. In June 2023, thanks to the feedback given by traders to government, a new duty reimbursement scheme kicked off, where traders that could provide sufficient evidence that their goods were not moved or sold to the EU, they could claim back any duties they had paid for those goods, and this could be backdated all the way to the 1st of January 2021. In September, we also saw the introduction of the new UK Internal Market Scheme, UKIMS, which effectively replaced the UK Trade Scheme, making it more flexible and expanding the number of traders that can be considered part of the internal market. This is also scrapping a lot of the customs processes like supplementary declarations and making sure that goods can move easily through the green lane for those goods that are considered not at risk. So some of those changes in terms of the UKIMS include as well the fact that there is no longer the requirement of having a physical premise in Northern Ireland. Also, the turnover threshold for companies that are sending goods for processing or manufacturing in Northern Ireland has quadrupled, going from 500K to 2 million. And some goods that are used in animal feed, healthcare, construction, and non-for-profit sectors are exempted from such turnover thresholds. So those are good, important changes to be considered. And then in October 2023, there was the introduction of the Northern Ireland Retail Movement Scheme, NIRMS, effectively replacing the temporary agri-food movement into Northern Ireland scheme, STAMNI. And this is basically allowing for retail goods such as food, drink, flowers, and pet food to move through the green lane. Also, new labeling requirements under the NIRMS, starting, which is going to take in 3 phases, but the first phase kicked off last year with some dairy products moving from GB to Northern Ireland. I already talked. And these are the main changes coming this year. So we have in January 2024, there will be full custom controls will be applicable for shipments coming directly from Irish ports directly to GB, including non-qualifying Northern Ireland goods. So HMRC, and this is worth clarifying, has defined qualifying Northern Ireland goods as products on free circulation that are in free circulation in Northern Ireland, and therefore not under any customs procedure or in any authorized storage facility. Also, under the customs duty waiver, if a trader was already moving goods that are considered to be not at risk, they might be able to claim a waiver on customs duty pays that otherwise will be charged. And the duty waiver allowance will increase to 275,000 euros, roughly 235,000 pounds. There is no changes though in how to claim it. In September 2024, big changes as the Green Lane will open up for the movement of all goods moving from GB to Northern Ireland. This is reducing the amount of customs processes and paperwork and basically utilizing commercial information primarily. There is also some changes coming up for posts and parcels, making it easier, scrapping customs processes, but until then, existing arrangements will continue to apply. And in 2025, we're going to see the arrangement of for supply of medicines into Northern Ireland will be introduced, meaning that medicines will be available through Northern Ireland and will be approved by the UK authorities. And it will also enable a single license and a single pack for medicines across the UK. Also, as I mentioned before, with more NIRMS labeling requirements will come into place, but further guidance and information will be made available through the TSS service. So they will continue to operate and they will be providing more detailed guidance to traders on how all these new schemes will in practice operate. So it's worth mentioning that all these, both the BTOM and the Windsor Agreement, will also be, it's very ambitious because there will be the introduction of new systems, and with any other introduction of IT systems, there will be potentially new teething problems. So we'll see next week as with the introduction of the health certificates, how it's gonna go. But these are some of the key changes that we think traders need to be aware of. Another thing I thought I will include in this update is the fact that the UK government has recently announced the introduction of a new import and supply chain strategy. And this has been important and came about as a way to a strategy that continues to build the resilience of the UK economy as a response to global supply chain shocks, such as, you know, we've been through very challenging times recently with the pandemic, natural disasters, recent invasion of Russia in Ukraine. There is a technologies, adoption of new technologies, all of these that are affecting the global supply chain. All this is going to focus on ensuring that the UK has critical access to imports of goods that are essential to the economy, essential services, and for national security. The strategy outlines some of those critical national infrastructure sectors, as you see in the slide, including chemicals, communications, defense, etc., etc. There is not much more information at the moment, but I thought I will make you aware because at some point the strategy will be looking at how to remove critical import barriers to some of those critical goods in the sectors I just mentioned. So there will be a point in time where UK government will be asking traders, academia, industry for their feedback about any barriers that may affect the access to those critical goods. Another big one, and this was announced just in December, is that the UK is following the footsteps of Europe with their introduction of their own carbon border adjustment mechanism, CBAM, by 2027. And this will function as a customs-oriented regime, placing liability on the importer of record for products that are falling within its scope. So these are some of the, even though it's a few years away, it's worth for traders to start preparing for it. And these are some tips for you to start thinking about, such as conducting a carbon footprint assessment, helping you identify areas where emissions can be reduced, but also on the data collection. I cannot stress how much this is going to be important. So liaise with your partners overseas and see how you can do this in a way that makes your lives easier and the collection and reporting processes. Assign somebody within your team that can start looking at how to manage these new regulatory changes. It's not just the UK CBAM, but as you will see later on, we'll have how you can support your customers in the EU with the EU CBAM. Invest in sustainability, so allocate resources to adopt sustainable practices, technologies, and energy efficiency processes. Optimize your supply chain. Monitor very closely the legislative regulatory developments that are happening. Make sure that you can also use this to your advantage, so as a marketing tool, so you can appeal better to your customers and consumers. And lastly, and this is where I will plug the chamber network again, is the fact that develop with engagement strategies when the UK government is asking businesses to provide feedback. The chambers provide a key role in this aspect as we voice the concerns of our members to both local and national government agencies. So this is very important. Make sure that you are keeping up to date with the future consultations and liaise with your local chamber if you are facing any challenges and the kind of support that you need going forward. So now I want to bring two experts into a table that are going to walk you through the CBAM and the VAT changes coming up in Europe. And before that, if I can launch another poll, Francesco, which is how clear are you about the EU upcoming changes that are going to come in the next few years? Well, CBAM is already in place. Thank you so much for your feedback. This is very useful. I can see that most of you are not that clear or very unclear of how these are gonna come about. Okay, I'll give it a few more seconds. Okay, well, thank you so much. Great feedback. We can see that definitely not very clear on both the CBAM and the VAT. So thank you so much for that. And now if I can welcome Conor Monaghan as a custom expert for Customs Complete. They're her HQ based in Ireland, but they are all over Europe. And if I can just ask you, Conor, to, oh, there you are. So thank you so much for being here. And yes, I'll leave you to just let me know when you need to move the slides and I'll do. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Susanna. That was all very interesting. So I'm here to give an overview of the CBAM and what that means for UK and European companies. Now, fortunately, the UK at the moment does not have reporting or financial obligations. These are said to be coming into play in 2027, but that could be earlier. So this now will be referring mainly to European trade. The Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, is effectively a carbon tariff. So companies that are importing goods in certain industries such as steel, iron, cement, aluminium, electricity, hydrogen, and fertilizer may have to start reporting on the emissions that are created in the manufacturing of their products. So those, well, 7 that are listed there are the initial products which will be covered. However, within those main categories, there are certain commodity codes which are applicable and certain commodity codes which are not. So before evaluating whether or not you're going to be required to do CBAM reporting, you'll need to figure out the HS codes and whether they apply. The list of HS codes that are CBAM applicable is not enormous. It's not millions, it's maybe between 50 and 100. So it's quite easy to figure out whether or not your company will need to report on this. It's worth noting as well that the UK has already said that they will be adding glass and ceramics to those industries that are above there. This will ultimately increase the cost of export for non-EU producers. Most of the energy intensive production now for things such as steel and iron is coming from outside of the EU. So it's going to be pushing companies towards more local suppliers where possible. And the emissions that are going to be monitored are carbon dioxide for all industries, nitrogen oxide is for fertilizer, and perfluorocarbons is for aluminium. So if you could go on, please, Susanna. So the CBAM regulation became applicable in October the 1st, 2023. And these first 2.5-ish years, well, two years and 1 quarter, are a transitionary period where companies are going to be required to make quarterly reports based on their emissions. From 2026, this will then incur a financial obligation to pay based on the emissions that your products are incurring. So this first quarterly report is actually due at the end of January, which covers Q4 2023. But like I said, there's no, at the moment, financial liability. There are penalties for not submitting the report in time. But from what I've seen, those penalties are relatively low. And the EU have made it very clear that this is a trial and a test. So they're keeping the penalties low and they're waiting to hear feedback from companies. They understand there's going to be teething issues, and it seems a lot of companies are very confused about what they need to be doing. So it's all up in the air at the moment, and there's likely going to be changes as it goes along. But for now, this is the basis of it. By 2030, the plan is to include all of the sectors that are covered by the EU emissions trading system. So the ETS covers all of the industries I've mentioned before, as well as things like refinery, paper production, glass production, anything relating to oil and energy, aviation, and basically any labor and energy intensive industry, which is most industries, to be honest. So if you could go on, please, Susanna. So short term, what we're advising for our customers is to design some sort of mechanism for gathering the necessary data for quarterly reporting obligations. Now, to gather the correct data, you're going to need supply chain, people involved in your own supply chain. You're going to need your import and export agents, and you're also going to need people with technical capabilities related to the actual manufacturing. So any manufacturing or processing that your company is doing will incur, if they're using the relevant HS codes in those relevant industries, you will incur either direct or indirect emissions costs. Well, costs not yet, but reporting obligations. So these will need to be, to figure out the individual processes, you will need someone who knows the technical process and who understands the emissions that are being generated. So it's going to be quite a multifaceted report involving quite a lot of different people and quite a lot of technicalities. So to give an example, if you have one company importing steel from China into the UK, that company eventually will need to report on their on the production of their on the production of that steel. So the emissions that are released from manufacturing and processing that steel, they will need to report on that. Now, if they sell that steel to someone else in the UK and that person processes it, and then they sell it to someone in Europe, every part of that supply chain will have to report on their on their on the emissions that they're creating from their part of the supply chain, from their processing. And the company in Europe will then need to do the final report, which shows all steps of the supply chain. So it's quite a complicated process that's going to require a lot of different people involved. And then midterm, what we're recommending is to develop a mechanism to manage the financial liability. There are systems in place now, specifically from now until July, where companies can use estimates provided by the European Commission in order to not have to go into the real deep details of their product and their manufacturing process. Because it's all happened relatively quickly, the authorities understand that it's going to be very difficult at first for companies to get this all in place. So they've offered up these estimates based on the products and based on processes and HS codes that companies can put forward in their reports for the first 6 months up until July 2024. And there are various different reporting methods which companies can use for their CBAM report. But ultimately, from 2026, when it comes to actually paying money for the emissions you're producing, companies are going to want to get exact figures as opposed to using these estimates and using certain methodologies which may be less accurate but easier to do. So there's a lot up in the air at the moment. If you could go on, please, Susanna. Oh yeah, that's my last slide. So I hope that I've covered it really quickly now for you. I imagine there'll be some questions at the end, so I wanted to leave it a little bit open and just go over the very basics now. But yeah, thank you for your time, and I hope that's been helpful.
Thank you so much, Connor. And I think that's just meant to give you a kind of an overview what is coming your way, especially you're dealing with EU customers. And now if I could welcome Alessio Lencioni, a VAT expert that we have worked very closely with. And he's going to walk you through some of the key changes that the EU will be introducing in the coming years. So welcome, Alessio, and just let me know when you need to move the slide.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the introduction, Susanna. And thank you for everyone for joining us today. A large component that we've been assisting a number of British exporters over the last 5 years has specifically been around the challenges that in a post-Brexit world in terms of how UK businesses can adapt not only their supply chains, but also the requirements around their VAT compliance when moving products into the European Union. Pre-Brexit and post-Brexit, a lot of talk was around it, and similar to what Connor just spoke about now, it's actually quite polarizing to actually see how, although in a post-Brexit world where VAT changes were spoken about and highlighted quite significantly, CBAM seems to be in the same space as what VAT was 5-6 years ago when speaking about Europe. And arguably, this is quite a dynamic world, and specifically in the space of the UK exporter, these changes, specifically in Europe, are consistently occurring. And the nice thing about it is that we do have significant road ahead of us in order to assist businesses to implement changes, and at the same time put ahead processes in order to deal with these up and coming changes. You can go to the next slide, please, Susanna. So a large part of, like I mentioned, our focus has been at Retrade is to speak about the changes of VAT in the European Union and how that affects the supply of goods and sales into Europe. And a large change that has been in the works since 2020 is something called VAT in the digital age. When the European Commission first announced these type of changes, it was focused around specifically imports, and a large part of this focus is now being derived into specifically businesses that are importing into Europe and making sales thereof. It's often referred to as VIDA, V-I-D-A, and it's primarily situated around two key cornerstones that affect UK exporters. And that looks at the standardization of digital reporting requirements and e-invoicing in intra-community transactions. And the second around the reduction in registration requirements for businesses making sales in Europe and the requirement thereof the one-stop shop, as well as the application of reverse charge mechanism to businesses based outside of the European Union. You can go to the next slide, please, Susanna. So if we have to look at e-invoicing, e-invoicing is quite a new phenomenon in the space of international trade, but it focuses on electronically delivered invoicing that utilizes a specific format to send from the receiving individual as well as the sending individual from a company perspective. Similarly, how sending a WhatsApp message from someone's phone to another person's phone utilizes a standardized form of messaging and containment of information. The same application would apply in e-invoicing. Businesses would have to adapt their systems in order to be compliant with this. And it is something that will only be implemented in the coming years and will allow for consistent change and for businesses to become completely compliant. However, it is something that will be enforced in the coming years, specifically for businesses that are making cross-border sales, whether it be via business-to-business transaction or business-to-customer transactions through sales via marketplace. There will be audits that will be done through various means, such as bank transactions, electronic money institutions with the likes of Visa and MasterCard, and other regulated payment institutions, whether it be a marketplace like Amazon or Etsy, just to name a few. So it is fundamentally important that retailers as well as wholesalers that will be making those types of sales ensure that their systems that they do currently have in place from a recording of invoicing and facilitation does in fact comply with the upcoming requirements in the years to come. The next slide, please, Susanna. The second is the digital reporting requirements. This is something that has been ongoing in a country like the Netherlands for quite some time, who were early adopters of such reporting standards, but it is something that is soon going to become further adopted across the European Union. And this specifically revolves around the replacement of recapitulative statements in terms of a form of reporting transactions, specifically with regards to sales made intra as well as cross-border into the EU. And the acronym usually referred to is DRR for the intra-community transactions that will be covered in this. This will also account for goods and services that are subject to the reverse charge mechanism. So for those that are not familiar with it, a very high overview of the reverse charge is where two businesses that are both registered for VAT in a particular country, in this instance the Netherlands, would not be required to charge sales VAT from the seller to the buyer if they are both VAT registered. However, they would both be required to submit reports to their relative tax authority to ensure that they have both recorded the transaction. The reason for this is purely to relieve the administrative and accounting burden with the transfer of funds unnecessarily, because VAT is naturally a consumption tax that will only be ultimately consumed by the end buyer of those goods, usually meaning the end individual. And ultimately, this reporting mechanism is something that has been put in place in order to ensure that companies are reporting on that correctly, and that the reverse charge is being applied correctly to ensure that there's no VAT fraud being done in this regard. Why it is so important for UK exporters that are importing into the European Union is that this information has to be synergistic. It has to comply to the shipping information that is being used to clear goods into the European Union. And specifically when submissions are made to the tax offices, whether it be for the reverse charge filings, as well as the VAT filings that are applied to those respective tax offices. This is something we work very closely with a number of our clients to ensure that everything aligns, because once those issues arise, it is very difficult to ensure that the processes are put in place on an ongoing basis where these hiccups do not occur again. So we work from inception with our clients to ensure that all of these aspects are met. Next slide, please, Susanna. Another aspect that we spoke about is the extension of IOSS as well as OSS. They work quite similarly to each other, but OSS is more specific for businesses that are making sales more in the B2C space, where they would have to charge local VAT to the end consumer. Ultimately, this would, before the inception of OSS, this would have required companies to have multiple VAT registrations across Europe, or pan-European VAT registrations. And this became quite an administrative nightmare for businesses to ensure that they were completely compliant. With the introduction of OSS, it allowed companies to facilitate singularized reporting into one tax office, while sales were made to multiple different end countries. So if someone was selling multiple e-commerce sales to individuals in Italy or France or Poland or Germany, they would be able to charge the end VAT amount, but be able to singularize the reporting through one standard tax office report via the Netherlands or via France. However, this was only possible for UK exporters that had also registered for an EU VAT registration within Europe, which specifically, if it was a smaller company, was quite a large inhibitor, purely due to the cost associated with doing such. This has subsequently been extended to businesses outside of the EU now too. So UK exporters can utilize the OSS scheme without having to register for an EU VAT number, which is a big assistance to those businesses, but at the same time does require stringent controls and processes in order to ensure that the reporting is done correctly and the filings are done following the correct procedures. Similarly to what was stated above, the IOSS previously was only applicable to businesses that had importers codes registered within the European Union, and made it difficult for them in order to facilitate those shipments without that. IOSS is more applicable to businesses doing lower value imports, specifically those valued under 150 euros. But now the same aspect has been applied to businesses that are making sales through marketplaces, and specifically in the area of fast fashion, such as imports coming from the Far East, where those sales are being made via marketplaces such as Alibaba and the likes of. They have to utilize IOSS to ensure that the end user's local VAT is being charged correctly and the submissions thereof are being applied correctly. So IOSS is more applicable to the marketplace operators and those that are making sales through marketplaces, but it is fundamentally important to ensure that that is something that will be enforced going forward. The next slide, please, Susanna. We did touch briefly on the reverse charge mechanism, and that was more within reference to the domestic reverse charge. And that previously was only applicable to businesses that were based within the European Union. However, what is also being done now is companies that are based outside of the EU will now be able to benefit from the reverse charge mechanism, because the compliance thereof of that being applied will be transferred, and the risk will therefore be transferred away from the seller and rather to the buyer. I think specifically in a post-Brexit world, the European Union has seen significant pressure where the flow of goods has been quite great between the UK and Europe, specifically within the space of consumer goods and the likes of, where the VAT applicable has either been charged incorrectly or it has not been fulfilled and facilitated correctly. Therefore, if a European business has a VAT number, the VAT obligation will then be transferred to the buyer rather than the seller, meaning that an overseas seller does not need to register for VAT in an EU country if the buyer is already VAT registered. I'm sure there might be a couple of questions specifically regarding that, but that is basically my end in terms of this overview. But what I must stress is that this is ultimately very connected to the supply chain aspect and the flow of goods thereof, in order to ensure that the customs clearance and the VAT component must always align to each other in order for these aspects to all be facilitated correctly.
Thank you so much, Alessio. I hope that gave the attendees a great overview of what is coming. Obviously, a lot more comes to it, but this is the moment for Q&A, and I already have two. So one is from my colleague in Hull, and I think this is for you, Connor. And it says, what if you can't get information from suppliers? So what to do in that case?
So this is going to be a challenge. For this reason, they've introduced this grace period of up to July 2024 for when we're allowed to use the estimates. There is also another method which is called the mass method, which basically means that they can basically, each product will be assigned like a carbon percentage, the amount of carbon that's used per kilo of that product. So that's another one of the methodologies, but ultimately suppliers are going to have to give the information, because otherwise people are going to stop working with them. But yeah, it will be challenging at first, for sure.
We have another one, which is from Laurie. She's asking, whereabouts do we find the CBAM item list once the parts have been classified?
So for that, I have a list of them all. I can't remember exactly where I got it from originally, but probably from the CBAM regulation. There's a big long EU CBAM regulation, but I'm also happy to share the list afterwards if people need that. It's probably a lot easier.
Thank you. I think the even though we know that there is a bit more lacking on a specific guidance, there is already some information on the EU website on this. So, but if Connor, you can share what you've got, that would be great. Another question is, where is the list of HS codes applicable for CBAM available? I think similar to
that's the same question, I think. So yeah, we can make that available. We can find that.
Okay. Is there any other questions from the delegates? As I said before, both the slides and the recording will be made available through the chamber that you register with. So no later than next week, you can expect those in your inbox, I hope. Is there anything else? If not, I'll just ask one more question to Alessio, is what will be your top tips in terms of for these EU VAT changes, how to prepare, traders here in the UK should prepare for those changes, or what to do, in that?
I think the most important opinion, part of it in terms of it for me, Susanna, would be to ultimately look at what are the requirements per industry. So there are ultimately certain aspects that are more applicable to B2B sales, so business to business sales, as opposed to business to consumer sales. And at the same time, I think it would be in order to ensure that with the flow of goods, as well as the sale of goods, that when you are moving the goods, that the reporting that is done at customs aligns to what is being done at the respective tax office. That is something that we see time and time again. If that is not done correctly and it is not done in unison, it does raise red flags at the respective tax offices. And ultimately, being compliant is the most fundamental aspect of being successful with those sales, because then it is impossible to create a sustainable business thereafter. So I would say it would be about firstly raising the question to each of the respective chambers of commerce as the first port of call. Once they've done that, that chamber will then be able to direct them, I think, in the correct direction to ultimately prepare them for what those requirements look like with respect to their business. Unfortunately, it's no silver bullet that it will be applicable to each business in the same way. There will be idiosyncrasies and there will be subtle changes that will have to be applied. However, it would be best advice to firstly seek the best advice, and on the back end of that, ultimately following through on the implementation of what is said.
Thank you so much. And I have suddenly 3 more questions. I think, Connor, you're the popular with the CBAM. We have somebody saying that they already had a request from Poland to provide carbon use, but that was for some small parts like nuts and bolts, and they don't know even where to start. I will say, do connect with your local chamber and see what available support is. But I don't know if you have anything else to add, Connor, in terms of maybe just how to kick off the process in that respect.
So you have to analyze the supply chain. Are you buying these nuts and bolts directly from abroad, from a third country, or are you buying the steel in the UK and processing it yourself? It also depends on the value. If they're very low value, I believe under 150, it's not applicable. So it depends on the first thing you need to do is check the HS codes of those nuts and bolts, and if it is if they're steel or iron and they fall under the commodity codes, then you need to look further into it.
Thank you. I have another one, which I think is a good one in terms of will there be a transport element included in the calculation of the carbon emission for CBAM? Is this linked to the scope?
So transport is not included in CBAM. There are other similar schemes which do include transport, but CBAM focuses on installations. So by installations, they mean things like factories, warehouses, places where you're processing, modifying, changing the goods in any way, the energy that's related to that building, let's call it.
I have another question. I think I can answer that one. Are the CBAM reporting obligations only applicable to the EU at this time? I don't see anywhere that UK import needs to report anything at this time. As I mentioned earlier, the UK CBAM will not take effect until 2027, but that's not to say that you're not, this is the perfect moment to start kind of preparing and ensuring that you do start with your data collection. I cannot stress, we already had a customer asking us for support on this, and the amount of information that is going to be required for this reporting is unbelievable. So the sooner you start preparing and kind of following some of the guidance that is already available for EU, the likelihood is that the UK is not going to move too far from it. I don't know, Connor, if you have any additional things to say on that.
Yes, I think you've covered virtually everything there. It's just worth mentioning that it will not be applicable to your company if you're just importing and staying domestic in the UK at the moment. But if you export it into the EU, any of your products, then your customers in the EU are going to be requesting information from you. So they will be reporting, but you'll have to provide the data, which is, that's the hard part.
Well, I think that's it in terms of questions for today, but thank you so much for joining us. Just your last bit, please just give us some feedback on the session. We want to also know what other topics you would like to hear from us in future sessions. And if you can also tell us a bit of how you're finding trade, movement of goods, services, and people with the EU will be fantastic. So, Francesco, we can launch the last one for feedback. That will be great. Thank you so much to our speakers today, Alessio and Connor. Thank you so much for covering those things. And hopefully, if you are finding it difficult, you need a bit of more tailored guidance, as I said, first port of call, go to your local chamber. They are likely to know, they will be able to support you, or likely to route you in the right direction for support. So thank you so much. I can see that we are still having a few people finding it difficult to move goods with the EU. That's very much in line with our recent surveys and recent reports of Brexit and the new regulations. So this is fantastic. Thank you so much for your feedback. I cannot tell you how important it is and how much we do use this information to feed back into the local authorities and different UK government agencies. So thank you so much. I think I'm going to give it a few more seconds, so see if we can get many of you answering. And I can see that, yeah, we might be having to do a bit more specific sessions on CBAM and BAT going forward. If there is anything else that you wish to hear from our virtual sessions, please feedback to your local chamber, and we'll make sure that we put one in the next few months. Until then, thank you again for attending today, and thanks again, Alessio and Connor. It's much appreciated. So wishing you a great day, and as I said, we will circulate both slides and recorders next week. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susanna.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.